Hey everybody, welcome to Tavern Talks. I'm your wonderful guest and barkeep for the evening, and tonight we have another guest that has showed up in the tavern. Tonight we have Gabriel Isaac Lakey, and he is working on a project known as the Barbarian short film. So tonight we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about this and how maybe his acting skills and his creative mindset might help another player or somebody that's interested in this type of work. So before we continue, I'm just going to let him have a little bit of an elevator speech for the evening, and we'll start our conversation from there. So take it away.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm Gabriel Isaac Lakey. I am a film writer and director here out of Portland, Oregon. I do videography work on top of that for Providence Health and Services. So I definitely, my work is all over the place. But more importantly, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons about 10 years, 11, 12 on and off. Played it with my stepdad for all of that time, and that was kind of what led me into writing this specific project. So
Mm.
yeah.
Well, you answered one of my questions because it's my first question. Normally, I ask all my guests is, how did you get into this? And you just told me your stepdad. You said about 11 years ago.
Yeah, probably. I think he came into my life right around I was probably somewhere between 9 and 11, something like that, and very quickly got into Dungeons and Dragons from that.
Awesome.
My mom, she did a lot of theater too, so like I grew up watching a lot of theater, and
So you
so
have a lot
doing
of
something,
background in
yeah,
that perspective.
yeah, and so just having something that's so fun and improvisational was something usually you'd have to do a lot of preparing for a big theater show, and
Oh
that would
yeah,
take months and months. Where just sitting down with a group of friends on a Saturday and doing improv is a lot easier to do.
yeah, it is, and for some reason, it still kind of gets a lot of those moments that you'd be shocked on when you do something like improv theater or whatnot. It's not much as weird as it is to say. It's not much different.
No, there's a huge crossover. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of people that do that sort of thing and play Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, obviously with like Critical Role and stuff like that, but
Yeah. So, so I'm curious. My third question, of course, that I
yeah.
ask everybody is, when did you pick up, or have you picked up the mantle of dungeon master yet?
No. So it's
Okay.
something that I was definitely toying around with more recently. Ever since I got started doing more like scripts and building narratives through that, I think that really sparked my interest into diving into that part of Dungeons and Dragons. But no, up until this point, I had not. So like my stepdad Dean, he sadly passed away a couple years ago now, or just about 2 years ago now, and that's a big inspiration to why I was writing this project. And I think it's a I think it was really just trying to be honest to myself about what I knew about the game from a player's perspective.
Ah,
So, since the conversation within the script is kind of like a conversation between a dad and a son,
mm-hmm.
and the DM is definitely that dad figure, I thought it would be really important to approach it from the perspective of somebody that played the game rather than DM'd it.
Nice. So, what? And like I said, I don't want to dive too deep on some of these things because I know this could be a hard topic on a lot of this. You and I had talked before about it. Cool enough, though, I will say a quick shout out to Operation Tabletop, who is it's a charity organization that literally works with that portion. So it's people with PTSD. It's people that have are having issues in life that they have a place where they can get that type of help, but also through tabletop, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's
So
incredible.
it's great to have them in here tonight.
That's amazing.
So let's kind of dive into this a little bit.
Yeah.
Who is the barbarian?
Yeah, so the Barbarian is so like I was saying, it's kind of a fictionalized retelling of some events that I went through in my own childhood.
Okay.
And obviously I had more time with Dean, but basically what I wanted to do approaching this is like, what would that last fictional conversation that you would have with that person that you love that you didn't really get to say like a
Mm,
true goodbye to? And so from that, the character that I kind of built, and this is a story that's all about role models. It's all about parents.
mm-hmm.
It's my love for the people that made me who I am, and
Definitely.
so the barbarian follows a 13-year-old kid named LaMichael, and it's not only his character within the game is the barbarian, but we me and my like filmmaking partner Ian Fowler, we were talking about it, and he like it made so much sense because diving into grief and diving in how to manage it and all that stuff, like you really have to like go head first into it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no better description of a character that goes in head first in Dungeons and Dragons than a barbarian. I
Okay,
mean,
I
that's
like
just
that.
head
Yeah, you're
first.
right. Absolutely, 100%. So that was kind of the push forward was the fact that you pick this class that legitimately just drives forward no matter what, right?
Totally.
In recklessness and yeah,
Yeah, emotions are messy and so are barbarians, so you know what I
absolutely,
mean.
100%. Um, it's interesting because we just finished episode 20 on our show on Monday nights, and we had the same. We had a loss. We had one of our players who had passed,
Mm.
who had mistake for reasons
Yeah, yeah,
has
yeah, yeah.
moved on
Yeah.
in life, and it was a moment, and a lot of our characters were hurt, and you start to see those. And I'm curious if the barbarian, this short film you're doing, are you actually going to walk through all the stages of grief?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, I think it was definitely something that I was trying to do within my own like processing of it
Oh
because
yeah,
I had like written like a few really crappy short films right before it just because going through an experience like that puts you in a depressed state,
it
and I was
does.
just trying to get the motor going again. And so I just wanted to do something really honest to myself, which is where this came in. And yeah, so I mean, I definitely went through all the stages of grief, and I think the only thing that I really wanted to do is show how a part of your daily life it is, how you can go through all of those stages, and it's not necessarily like always that obviously right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Like as far as like going through denial and whatnot, it could be as simple as like not to spoil anything for the short film for which we are getting ready to shoot in October, but you have this room that you spent so much of your life in with your stepdad or your dad and in this, and it was a place that I didn't really want to return to super quickly, like because
Mm,
of the memories that are surrounded by it. And so that's kind of avoiding, that's kind of like acting like this isn't, something that you're actively going through and that you're actively dealing with. So
right.
it's like before you can actually approach that and go in and, start to handle those moments. Yeah. So trying to figure out and trying to how to tell that story softly but impactfully.
Right. That's interesting. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I have a feeling it's gonna be a great telling of, and it's gonna be a neat way to blend, real life and Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is the coolest part about it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I it was funny. I was listening to your guest just from last week, and it's killing me that I should have written down his name because he brought up the such a good point about how so much of media that looks at Dungeons and Dragons is very it's very in the world and not around the table. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that I really wanted to bring
Yeah.
into it because that around the table community feeling is so important to Dungeons and
Oh
Dragons.
yeah.
And so
I think, and
yeah.
surprisingly enough, it's a main reason why a lot of your larger streams and a lot of your larger productions are better when they're around the table.
Yeah.
Because I think it does give a different feel. It doesn't lose that personal feel that you're seeing when everybody's there. Um, there is something that there's a disconnect when it's across the screen.
Yeah.
As much as we try and we push and we try to find ways to clean up that disconnect or soften that disconnect, um, there's nothing like six people behind around a table where everything else is gone. I mean,
Totally. And it's such a unique experience too, right? Because it's like when you usually see film or you see media that covers a universe such as built as Dungeons and
mm-hmm,
Dragons is, again, it's always from the perspective of within it. And it's like you can tell so many stories within the universe, but
mm-hmm.
something that D&D that has, I mean, most TTRPGs in this way is like you never see really that experience around the table and how that affects the things within the universe. If you're playing Star Wars, it's in Star Wars. If it's, like just any sort
Oh
of
yeah, straight up.
yeah.
I think it was I made the comment when the last Dungeons and Dragons movie came out. I was hoping that either the beginning or the end credits was literally them in a room with a table,
Yeah.
and I was saddened that it wasn't the case. But
And they totally could have,
they
because
totally could have.
that whole cast played Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons together. Like
yeah,
just clip that, throw that at the end, call
yep.
it signed,
Call
sealed,
it signed
delivered.
and sealed and delivered. Puts a little bit of darkness, like a dark ambience behind the in the room, but yeah, it's definitely one of those things. This will be interesting because I think this is going to give that fantastic portion that you see for. Well, that was different. My screen just blanked out for a minute.
All good.
What is happening to my? Did everything actually change, or are we still good with everything? Nope, we're not. Give me a second. Let me figure out what's
You're
going
good.
on. There we
Them
go.
them HDMI's, they be a tricky one
I have no
sometimes.
idea what kind of HDMI craziness that just was. I've never seen that happen in my entirety, but we fixed. Cool. I think it was the just for some reason my screen just blanked out and then flipped over for a second. But as long as everybody can hear us still, we're good to go.
Yeah, no worries. I do streaming for Providence
Oh
a
yeah.
lot, and so I am so familiar with the pitfalls of streaming.
So, but I think the neat thing is that with stuff like this, and I was trying to, and my thoughts got cut off for a moment because streaming, um, is this is going to be a blend between an actual like play and something that feels similar to like Stranger Things, but without the craziness behind Stranger Things. Because it's
Yeah,
like you're not throwing yourself into the game, but you're telling that story on both sides of the table, inside the table and outside the table, which I think is really going to be a neat observation completely. Um,
yeah. It's been an interesting one to try to tackle from like a director standpoint, because it's like the universe that's happening around the table. I want to obviously feel different yet connected to the story that's taking place on the
mm,
table, and so I really had to approach that from like a lens choice perspective,
mm.
and so that whole the way that just choosing a single camera lens and how that can influence the feeling of everything
Oh
can
yeah.
is really crazy. And so one thing that I did is a couple months back, because I shoot on these beautiful vintage German photography lenses. um, there's this one super oddball one. It's a 21 millimeter, but it has this like super extended back optic on it, which is, fits on no camera besides the one that it was made for in 1964,
Oh wow. Yeah.
And so on a whim, I wanted to figure out one, obviously, I bought the lens. I wanted to figure out how I could play around with it and use it. So
Right.
I
Yeah. one
bought,
Hundred percent.
and luckily it just seems like it's kind of working out perfectly for this project specifically, because they had extension tubes, which basically is for macro photography. So if you want to take a photo of something super up close, you put those on your lens. It gets it a little farther away from the sensor and just,
Ah.
makes it super close. And so I was thinking, not that my math is at all accurate or that I'm good at math, by putting the extension tubes on, that back optic would get closer to my camera sensor without breaking it,
Mm-hmm.
and still maybe produce an image. And it did. I can't focus it at all, but it is a
I
very
can't focus it at all, but it did
I
produce an
can't.
image.
No, it doesn't focus. But so you have to put your camera right in the very specific select place to make
Right.
it give you an image, but the image that it gives is so beautiful and so it has such an ambiance and an atmosphere to it just visually that when we're going through those moments of describing what's happening on the table, I think that these moments will really just come in and really make up for where people would use like CGI or stuff like that
Mm,
inherently. Like, you know, if I'm trying to talk about like how the room is shifting in
right.
sound and how like bones are coming and building together and stuff like that, you would have some sort of bigger visual representation for
Right.
that. But I think this is a very creative and interesting way to try to tackle that, and I hope it turns out well.
Right. No, I completely agree. And I think it'll be interesting because, like you said, you're getting it to this point where you're not using CGI, you're not using a lot of high end, over the top, techniques.
Yeah,
But I also think there's a genuineness to this because that's what Dungeons and Dragons is, in
absolutely.
its form. And don't get me wrong, I play with terrain, I play with all the pretty things,
Of course.
but in its form, it's 4 to 6 people sitting around a table with
Yes.
pen and paper and dice and a brain, and that's it. And I think that is the uniqueness of it. That I'm looking forward to see how you tame that compared to the flashiness of now modern day cinema. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, lucky for me, because my stepdad Dean was such a he was a pretty well established dungeon master here in Portland. He did a lot of conventions up in like from here to Seattle.
mm-hmm.
And he also like ran games for conventions and stuff like that. And so lucky for me, we have this incredible wealth of miniatures and figures and terrain and whatnot. So we will be able to bring in some of that to
Right.
add a little visual flavor and just allow us to really develop the world. But yeah, I mean, none of the miniatures move, you know.
Yeah, nothing moves, nothing like, does the crazy stuff. But yeah, that's awesome. Really, I'm looking forward to seeing how plays out because of how unique it is compared to things like Critical Role, where they brought their world to life,
Yeah.
or things like Stranger Things, where you brought the fantasy to the real world. This is gonna be that blend that is gonna be interesting to see how it's played out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the fun thing that I, you know, as somebody that does a multi-camera setup stream for my work, right? So I have
Mm-hmm.
like 4 cameras and I do all the switching and stuff and we run classes. You know, then being able to do single camera shooting, like, and the inspiration that you have between those two things, I feel like it can really affect like how I view myself as a creative or I approach a project as a
Mm-hmm.
creative. Because it's like, you know, I've shot in some cool videos for some pretty big musicians, and you know, those are pretty standard multi-camera setup. And you're trying to create a cool image that looks cool across those 3 cameras that are set up,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just kind of let the thing go. But in something more narrative story based, you're really trying to figure out how does every part of that image impact the story progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really fun to just try to think about it from, okay, instead of what's the best coverage for everyone to see, what are those very select details and images do I want to display for the audience to lead into this reveal?
Mm. I like that, and that to me screams Dungeon Master in itself. As a game master, our goal is to get those little details to make sure that each one of our players has an enjoyable time at the table, correct? And I
Totally.
think that is where you're going to find that same mentality is I'm looking at a screen, which is the same way we do, and then we're just
Yeah.
looking at where those points are actually going to tell the story the best. And I really like that. I think that that's going to be something that we're going to be shocked about when it comes out.
Yeah.
So what kind of
Yeah.
music are you using for this kind of stuff? For this,
So I am
if you're allowed to say.
No, oh, totally allowed to say. I run the project, so I can say whatever I want. Um, yeah, no, I am really excited about this project as a whole. Like, not only is it for role models within the context of the film, it's also all of my role models within film that are coming together and really helping me
Oh
with
wow.
this project. So, um, the person that we're working with sound specifically is sound designer Mark Rose. Mark is the guy here in Portland.
The
He's
guy.
won, yeah, he's won I think 2 Emmys for his work, and he's just incredible. And I was right with you in the standpoint of like when I went and I sent him the script and I went over and I was like, so what do you think this sounds like? And he's like, I will only be able to come up with that once I see the mood and see the energy for which that you put on camera. And so
Ah,
I I have ideas, I have things that I love that I'll obviously talk to Mark about. I'm a
right.
big Studio Ghibli fan, so
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Go Hisaishi. I'm probably butchering his last name, but the guy that does all of the work for Miyazaki, he does the soundtracking for all of them. That's my favorite
Hmm.
music, probably for films,
Right.
definitely ever. So very classical, very but cinematic as well. Like really just I don't know. I'm a little out of my depth describing music. Like I'm such a fan, but trying to dive into the nitty gritty of it,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
going to leave up to the
100%.
professionals.
Yeah, no. I was just curious as to there was a mood you were going for or whatnot, and
Yeah, I mean, because it's following the 7 state or the multiple stages of
yeah,
dealing with grief and whatnot, I know that the music will definitely from the beginning to the climax like will be changing I mean, like
pretty
we changed.
drastically.
Yeah, I mean, we changed locations in some places. So with that, I would assume that the tone of the room changes
Yeah.
inherently, and so I'm very excited to see what Mark does with it.
And
He's the best.
you shot this whole thing in Portland?
Yeah, so we shoot it in October. We were originally going to shoot it in July, but I came down with basically this really odd skin condition that
Ooh,
made me allergic to caffeine. And as somebody that's been drinking caffeine on and off for over a decade, trying to figure out that I am now allergic to caffeine was like a
ouch.
3 month process.
Yeah, that's gotta be
Um,
a bit of a
cause
shocker just to try to figure that one out in your head. Like you're like, what do I do now?
Yeah, I mean, like I changed all of my clothing, like soaps that I used. I did the works. Obviously, the very last thing that I would want to consider trying to give up on is my caffeine addiction. So
Yeah.
I am past that now. I'm finally feeling healthy again, and so we pushed it back to October. But obviously shooting in October versus shooting in the hot ass months of July and June is going to be a lot more favorable for
Yeah.
my cast and crew. So ultimately, it was just the best move.
Nice. I love it. It's awesome. Um, Now we have the game master who is being portrayed by your as your stepfather or the father in the picture, and then we have the barbarian.
Yeah.
What other characters are you bringing into this film?
Yeah. So, because, I had the access of Dean when, because I lived with him, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and in my most excited states for Dungeons and Dragons, like when I was peaking on my Dungeons and Dragons intake, I had the ability to go and be like, he might be working, checking emails or something, and I'd be like, so do you think I could do this? Like there was like that sort of like bond connection where I could
Right.
check in with him about things without necessarily having everyone else around the table all the
Mm-hmm.
time. That special privilege, of course, of
Yeah.
my parent being the dungeon master.
Yeah.
But so and what I really enjoy about Dungeons and Dragons 2 is when the DM brings in these non-player characters.
Mm.
And so the only real player character, if we're gonna like separate what the DM does from what LaMichael, my lead character,
Mm-hmm.
does, is it's only LaMichael, and then
Okay.
it's his dad as the dungeon master, and then his dad also as a physical representation of this other character that he's playing with. So you're actually going to see
Ah.
this character twice. That's a little reveal that'll happen a little later on.
Yeah.
But I really, because I wanted to show the relationship of a player and a dungeon master, I thought, less focus on how many people we put around the table and just focus on the quality of characters and these two's relationship and interaction.
Okay. So this is gonna be more of a two-player game where
Correct.
your dad's kind of teaching the father's kind of teaching Dungeons and Dragons to this person. That's really interesting, and it's gonna be a lot of fun, I think.
Thank you.
I've never like interviewed somebody for an actual film, so like I'm trying to continue to
No,
gather
it's all good.
questions.
It's all good. Let me shout out, like, my film crew.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to give them all the props in the world.
100%.
This story is not only about my parents and role models, like how I got those role models and how they kind of brought me to this moment today, I feel is very important to me. And so, like, when I graduated college for film here at Portland State, I feel like I got more of like a critic's degree. I feel like I got more of like a why I can tell you why I didn't like something, but I couldn't inherently tell you how to fix it. And through that schooling process, I had actually, funny story. I met my filmmaking partner, Ian Fowler, when I was working at Michael's craft store. He came in for prop supplies, and I was like, I'm a sophomore in college going into film. Like, can I just come hang out on set? And so I hung out for one of the last days of a movie, I hung out for one of the first days of shooting, and then I didn't see him for about a year and a half. And then I graduated college, and I was like, oh, fuck, what am I going to do? You have the classic college graduation panic attack.
What do I do? I have to be an adult now.
Yep. And so I hit up Ian immediately, and I was like, can I come help out on set? And in 24 hours, I was on the final day for his shoot for that same movie. It took him like 2 years to get that whole thing together. And I was there holding a bounce. So I had a day and a half of helping out with that project, and I got my names in the credits. And that was, I felt addicted after that.
That's what started. I feel you there.
And
you get that same addiction when you write books.
Absolutely. And then because obviously, I love Ian. He's not always he doesn't have a job coming at him every single week for film and whatnot. So it's like, if I want to sustain this, and still do film, I need to figure out like how I can pay for myself as a human being and then pursue this passion project too. And so I found an internship with Providence Health and Services, and then I just got connected with Nick Perkis and some of the other guys there. They were all like super qualified. They had, worked on a lot of projects previously, and just because they all wanted to settle down and make sure that they didn't have to do the freelance life and, so they could raise their kids and whatnot, they all kind of similarly settled at Providence for this period of their life. Okay. And that allowed me to come in and absorb an extreme amount of information. And what is incredible about them is that they are complete like tech heads when it comes to film. So that's, they were the guys that got me hooked onto my German photography vintage lenses. They were like, we feel like you have this aesthetic. I looked at it. I'm like, that's my aesthetic. And that was it from there. And so they were the guys that really helped me figure out how to set up shots, how to, use a camera. And then Ian, because he did narrative work, I really got to learn more about story construction and, because there's structure to all stories. And through him, I got a brutal crash course into what that looks like. I wrote some scripts, and then he would tear them apart, but in the way that you need it to like sink in.
Right.
Like, this is how these important moments within a story work. And so he is my like storytelling mentor, and then Nick is my like filming and like camera tech mentor.
Okay.
Now they're both coming together to help me on the short film as well.
That's awesome.
Ian is my director of photography, and Nick is going to be helping with all the gaffing, camera operating, and all the titles are very blurred because we're all going to be doing these different roles. But
Right.
I feel very lucky.
You don't have like a Marvel series,
I don't.
cast where you've
I
got
don't.
7,000 people on staff.
No, I wish someday.
Yeah.
Someday.
One day.
One day.
Yeah. Well, I have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
So, Beaker says this sounds like a very cathartic piece for you. Do you think moving the film in the fall will have a bigger impact on the feeling of loss and the overall grieving process than the original summer schedule? I didn't think about that, but that's
I mean, shoot, that's a really good point. I think at least from a script perspective, firsthand, I think it is going to do a lot to build the ambiance of the film, swapping it to the fall. Portland, we're very much known for rain, grieving. It's very there's a lot of
you might have some natural ambiance.
Yeah, energy that's happening there. And because I'm from Portland too, I've always felt a connection to the rain. I've always felt a connection to these aspects of being a Pacific Northwest person, and rain and forest and outside is definitely a huge part of that. And that was one of the things that Dean really enjoyed when he came out here and lived out here. So I think for me, it's going to feel more honest, probably, to myself of how it visually looks in my head, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, because when I sat down to write, it's one of those things that I'm really trying to picture in my brain what everything looks like. And definitely a bright summer, shiny day wasn't the first thing that jumped out to me. We can work with it, but no, I think this is just better for so many different reasons.
Yeah.
And that was a great question. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, patrons of the tavern, if you have questions, make sure you're dropping those up in the chat room while we continue. So, this big project, now I'm going to go a little bit outside of this and say, are you still playing Dungeons & Dragons, or was this kind of your stop?
So definitely with my stepdad passing away, that put a harsh stop to my playing. And I think this is a big reason why I'd reached out to you and why I had reached out to some other people within the community is because he was a part of the TTRPG community. Like, he was a big part of it here in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. And so I felt like if I were to also honor him as a person, I would want to find myself connecting with those same individuals or, people within this universe so I can better articulate myself, but also just feel more connected to him and feel more connected to this game that now that my bridge to this game no longer is, it collapsed.
Right.
It's time to figure out a new bridge or rebuild that thing. Yeah. So,
well, I will tell you, if Seth's still in here from Operation Tabletop, they run weekly games, monthly games that anybody can hop into.
Amazing.
Yeah, they do a lot of good things. I would offer a spot at my table. My tables are full right now.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
But when they do open, I'd be happy to have you at the table.
Please keep me in your ear because I'm dying to jump back into it. Right. I was, the fun thing is that a lot of the tables that I grew up playing, not because Dean didn't want to do role-playing super heavily, just the people that found themselves were a lot more strategic. They were a part of the more tactician-based Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, versus when he started playing, I mean, that was what D&D was for the first, 15 years of its life. So first and second edition were not as big on the whole
role-playing
aspect of it. They were more on, that's why there were so many really weird, odd general items that you were supposed to carry around with you because you had to utilize those. You had to utilize all those abilities.
No, I mean, absolutely. Dean definitely played it from the first. I feel like he played first edition. I'm 95% positive because he's been playing it since he was 7 or 8 as well.
Wow.
or I can't necessarily remember how old Deaton
Right.
was.
No, and that's fine.
But I know he picked it up very quick and from a very young age. And so, I feel like I'm one of the few people that I've met that have even played 3.5 at this point, which is interesting. It's, it's fun. I played 3.5, 4, and 5. We definitely made sure we still had a 3.5 game going while 4 was around. We definitely had some qualms with 4, but really loving 5. What I got to play of 5 was, I really love the added simplicity that I think that 4 allowed, but turned down a little bit from the simplicity of 4.
No, I completely agree. I believe, and I know a lot of people right now with the big controversy of what's going on with the TTRPG world right now. We're not going to dive into that because we try to keep this as positive as possible here in the tavern. But what I will say though is that you're right. 5th edition really was an opportunity for people who didn't want to be heavily involved in a TTRPG to at least step into it. It was very simple. It was very straightforward. And if you really broke it down, it wasn't a lot of steps. Mm-hmm. You could always add to it, but to its core, it was very simple and easy to play. And we've seen that because now it's, in a massive, it continues to amass more and more as we continue this direction towards what I would say is a TTRPG peak coming up. I don't know yet, but it is a possibility.
Well, I mean, just like looking at the success of like Baldur's Gate, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, because that's like completely based off of 5. 3 anyways is, right? And I wonder if because, I'm 28, so I feel like I was exposed to Baldur's Gate just through 3. And so I don't really know. I wasn't very familiar with 2 or 1. I was familiar with some of the other Larian games that they had going, but I wonder how much of the success to Baldur's Gate 3 obviously is storytelling, but that swap to 5th edition versus previous editions that they might have been doing, because I'm positive that 2 or at least 1 came out before 5th edition.
Both of them were out way before 5th edition.
So I wonder how much that made it more approachable for the larger audience, thus winning it Game of the Year and all of that stuff.
Well, and like I said, I think the interesting thing of this, and I know that your stepdad probably be in that same mindset group, is that you start to see all these people in large communities that are in, let's say, very prominent communities. Like we're talking actors, we're talking not like basic act, we're talking like A-list actors, A-list musicians. They've been hiding this puzzle piece to their success for so many years because they didn't think it was okay to release it.
Yeah.
And now they're all coming out and stating that, no, this was part of their success. Like, I got to talk to Joe Manganiello at GaryCon last year, and he will literally tell you, like, Dungeons and Dragons was during his high school years is what pushed him to be an actor. Yeah. And people like him and Vince Vaughn and those guys who are these A-list actors that go to these conventions like this. And it's funny because I was talking to a couple people about it, asking questions like, hey, why are they signing autographs? No, they're just there to play with the people that they connect with. And I was like, holy crap, like they're just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And they really are. But I think that's the interesting portion, is that we're seeing now this change that people are it's accepting now, right? Because 5th edition kind of made it more accepting for everybody.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I bet too that those two are just, some of the most wonderful human beings, because it's just like through playing this game that is so community driven, it's like you just get used to being around people and being nice and being like. So I also graduated with a degree in communications, and there was this like concept of masking, which is just like who you are when you go to the bank, right? I'm not the same Gabe Lakey I am at the bank as I am here on this podcast. And so, but I feel like that same level of just appreciation and appreciation for others and communicating with others that's so apparent in Dungeons and Dragons, I have to imagine not only allowed them to connect with other people within acting, but just being human beings, you
Oh
know?
yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's one thing this has definitely helped with is you're seeing that over and over and over again. Um, so this is another inner question. Beaker seems
Yeah.
to be on point tonight. Uh, Not sure if you answered this already. Do you intend to maybe have the crew play a simple game to help bond the team and feel closer to the project?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that I was playing around with. And if we have the opportunity to do it, I would still love to. I think just because of the health condition that I went through, all of that sort of stuff kind of got set on the back burner, sadly. But something that's really fortunate about this project is I'm working with not only stellar actors, but they're actors that have all worked with each other before.
Ah,
Um, so there is already an inherent rapport that they all have with each other. And so if we don't get to, I am not concerned at all about team chemistry and team bond because not only am I a connective tissue to all these people, right,
mm-hmm.
between cast and crew, but there's more just connection that the cast has together. So just the allowance for space that they'll give each other and just like inherently working with each other will just it's gonna feel like a dream, I feel like.
Yeah.
To speak to my cast, because it is so small, there's only 3 people in the entire cast.
Oh wow.
And yeah, it is super
So you have three of the
macro.
cat. So you have three
Yeah.
cast and three crew, pretty much, and that's about it.
Yeah, and like a BTS photographer. And we obviously have hair, makeup. We're gonna have food. Like there's a bunch of other people that
Right, right,
should
right.
also be given all of
Given
the
their
props.
props. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're gonna have between 10 and 12 people on set for most days.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean the cast. Just to speak to them real quick, I feel very lucky because one, we have Broadway actor Vin Chambry who signed on for the role. Vin's awesome. He's a beautiful human being, inside and out. And like, what's great about having somebody that comes from that theatrical background, and he definitely has his points for filmmaking and film, of course, as well. But I really, when I was looking for casting a dungeon master, I needed somebody that could deliver a monologue. You know what
Mm.
I mean? Because it's so important,
Mm-hmm.
and you see it with good DMs, is how they build the scene in their language, in their
Right.
dialogue. And so I just needed somebody that could, make reading the back of toothpaste sound great. You know what I mean? And that's what Vin does. So I feel very lucky there. And then the LaMichael character is played by Windsor Williams. Windsor's fantastic. I feel incredibly lucky to have him on board. He is such a wonderful 13-year-old child. Like the when we had auditions for him, he came in completely off book. Like he is such a professional, but he is also so giving, giving to the people around him. He for a 13-year-old, he gives everybody space. He checks in with people.
Oh
Like
wow.
he's he's the man.
He's the
And
man. That's awesome.
that was something that, because I feel like I'm a part of this generation of more emotionally tuned in men. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we're starting to see more of a trend of, or men that are
Yeah.
just more in tune with how they're feeling. And so seeing Windsor, and obviously Windsor and I look nothing alike, but uh, the way that he speaks and the way that he just approached talking with me and everybody else, it reminded me so much of myself. And
Okay.
so having him not only be a absolute powerhouse professional with his ability to come in off book, but also being there, taking notes, being emotionally upfront, and
Mm.
giving himself in that way. It's just wonderful.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then of course I have to shout out Hannah Jo Phillips too. Hannah's wonderful. I'm so ecstatic to have her on set. She's got her own stripes in her own regards, and she works with Vin very like they they have a very good relationship, and they've worked with each other a lot. So when Vin was like, I have this perfect person in mind, it was a very easy
Easy, easy
yes,
recommendation, and you're like, oh yeah,
yes,
definitely,
definitely.
yeah. So is this person, this third person, is this going to be playing the mother, or is this going to
Correct.
be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And it's fun too because it's like it's one of those things that because I grew up in a split household before Dean had come along, so there's a little bit of that sort of like empty house feeling that I'm
Mm.
pulling from in that experience, right? And not that my dad's not around. It's just going through divorce, you're definitely going to be left, especially as an only child, in
Yeah.
these moments of solitude. And so that was something that I really wanted to make sure came through.
Mm.
And so yeah, so Hannah, she has a very important scene to me because I feel like it very much represents the relationship that I have had with my mom and how she has also played an influence because yeah, like I was saying, my mom, she was a part of a theater company for a very long time,
Mm-hmm.
so being around acting was super important to me. And she also loves D&D. Like, she didn't play it all the time, she was much more interested in the lore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's read just about every single D&D book you could probably find on the
Awesome.
internet at this point. She's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that. And so, but seeing that person that's like going through this traumatic event also, but then on top of it has to be the
What a strong
provider.
character. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I feel like she has a whole story that's within it that even though it's subtextual for most of it, you can see the full journey that she's been going through and how she's approaching it with her son as well.
Mm. That's interesting because, like I said, it's going to be a very unique way of playing Dungeons and Dragons because it's only a two-player game
Yes.
for you two, and then having the mother figure understanding everything, but still being able to, but still having to deal with all of the trauma and the
Yeah.
change. So
Yeah. And, obviously thinking about how other people are affected, it takes influence on how you design a set, how you design like what the living space feels like. Cause,
mm,
LaMichael's not the only person that's living in that space, right?
right.
So you have to think about all of the things that this other person must be going through that's not even on full display. So yeah, it just does a whole lot for world building too.
Yeah. So do we get a sneak peek on what the world is like?
So, yeah, so the world is Dean's world.
Okay.
Um, I felt it was very important, and also it's the world that I know. You know what I
Right.
mean?
It's the world you know.
Um, so it's in the world of Yonde, and it primarily because it's such a contained, specific space. I've definitely thought about turning this into a feature film if we are provided the opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd love to go into more of the world building that takes place within it.
Yeah.
But since we're at a very specific climactic spot, um, it really takes place at towards the end of this campaign, right? Because
Okay.
it's like the concept of it is like, how does somebody that not only lost their dad but didn't get to complete the story that they were doing?
Ah.
It's
Okay.
like the combination of those two things.
Yeah.
So we're at the end of whatever this adventure
Mm-hmm.
was that they went on, but there's a lot of drops of like the town or the city that we were all started at from our Boulder's Gate or whatever
Right.
was
Right. Right.
Victory. Like, it was the connective city that connected all of our characters together. But he had beautiful maps that he had hand drawn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dean was a. It's funny. I don't think he was necessarily always the most super creative human being as far as like how he presented himself. But when you put him in this environment, he was probably one of the most creative human beings.
That's awesome. I'm gonna ask one other question because I think it
Mm-hmm.
really is gonna hit home to you, and I think it's gonna be an interesting question for others to hear.
Sure.
Is with you being experienced all this and this world that you're playing in the movie, how did it make you feel going back to some of those moments?
Yeah, I mean,
Because
it just
nostalgia
makes
can kick in so easily when you start
sure.
talking about like the town you went in. Because I know personally for me, um, there's some things in my life that have been so tragic and destructive, and I remember more the adventure I was playing during that time than I do the
Hmm.
actual moments I was dealing with at the time. So I'm curious with the idea of the loss thing, and then the idea of everything you coming back to these moments of remembrance. Um, Not really how you feel in the movie, but rather how you're taking it as the
Mm.
person coming back to relive those moments.
Yeah, I mean, this whole project is about healing for me, 100%. Not only do I think it's a good opportunity to put my skills on display. I have shot a feature film before, and it did very well in the or what is very well, but it did well in the film festival market.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like inherently a film festival film, so I think this emotionally will resonate with a lot more people. But yeah, I mean, such a huge part of it is just about healing my own trauma around
Mm.
Dungeons and Dragons and not having this person that I was so connected to, um, yeah, do that anymore. So, it's one of those things that I was looking at it as like, unless I am, unless I'm the person to take on the mantle of this universe that Dean created,
Mm-hmm.
and this inherently might be the last game to ever take place in Yonde. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Just looking at it from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And I felt like that wasn't, I didn't want to see it end in this way. That was just like, it was a time in history that happened in my basement.
Yeah.
Instead, I wanted to live on as more of like, here's this thing that influenced me. Here's the story that people can connect with and allow me to heal and feel like this universe, this thing that he created and spent, 30 years developing from all the different games that he played, that it just doesn't end with,
Mm.
and that's kind of the big central message of my whole film going into it is just through all of the trauma, through all of the character changes, through all of the rotations that happen on the table. The story doesn't end. It always continues. It might be a new adventure, it might be a new character, but like you can't stop because the story doesn't stop. So as important it is to find that moment for you to heal and
Yeah.
take the time that you need to, but it's time to analyze and self-realize that this isn't the end of a journey.
No, that's perfect. And I think it's a great way for us to end our show tonight because you're right.
Amazing.
The story doesn't end. Right. That's the great part about Dungeons and Dragons, and it's about our and is you continue to write this story and you continue to write this film. Um, it's just pushing that story farther and farther along.
Yeah.
Um, so let's bring it back up to a good note. So when is this coming
Yeah.
out?
So we shoot in October. We shoot
Okay.
the first 2 weekends of October. So you'll definitely start seeing some more movement on our Instagram around that moment in
Yeah.
time. Then sound stuff that can take 3 to 4 months. I'm very lucky to have the sound team that I have
Mm-hmm.
doing this. I know that they're going to do an excellent job, so I want to make sure to give them all the time and all the space to give their full selves to this project without feeling like there's this inherent need and this inherent rush to get this done. So my hope is early to mid 2025 will be pretty close to wrapping the project as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so probably maybe July of 2025 we'll start submitting. Hopefully before then. A big thing for me is trying to get into some multiple short film and feature film festivals that
Yeah.
I think we're very close to getting into, just based off of the work from my previous film. I think we're right there. And
That's awesome.
so it's just about doing something that's fully planned out and fully giving to this project. Because with Punched After the Fact, my previous feature film, it we fundraised the week that COVID hit,
Oh.
and so it was great. We got our money, but now we had to wait for over a year before we
Hmm.
could even do a small cast and crew shoot, right? Because of everything that was happening. And so on that film, it was very go with the flow, trying to just deal with the punches that were dealt with us that's in this time of COVID filmmaking.
Hmm.
And this is not that. This is the time where I can be as dramatic and as, for lack of a better word, anal about everything, and really just develop it through and through. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, do you have anything left you want to say about this film or about that you want to tell people before we
Yeah.
head out?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I could say is, love and cherish the people around you, because there are so many things that could happen on a daily basis that doesn't allow you to give whatever sort of goodbye that you might want to be able to give somebody, or just what's the chances of having another conversation, or like cherish these moments, cherish these people, because they're not always going to be around, but because of how non-permanent life is, it's also important to realize that more beautiful people exist out there for you to connect with too.
That's
So
awesome. Thank you for coming
yeah,
on our
thank
show
you.
tonight. Quick shout out to Andrew and Vika. I wanted to say hi.
I love those guys.
So, hope everybody enjoyed tonight. This was a new type of interview. I'd never done a video interview before for films, but I felt this was definitely one that I wanted to allow Gabriel to tell because it was such a heartfelt and it connected so well to the TTRPG community that we watch over here in the tavern. Um,
I appreciate that. And then who knows? Maybe in a year when we have the project done, we can do a special little screening here.
Sounds good. And I'd have a honor to be able to tell another story in your stepfather's world
Thanks.
as a homage to him during
Yeah,
that time.
I
So
would I would love to talk about that. That
yeah,
would be
we can talk
wonderful.
about it. All right, cool. I hope everybody enjoyed tonight. This is Tavern Talks. I am your wonderful barkeeper. It is 10 o'clock and it is time for me to wrap things up. So raise your glasses high. This is last call. We'll see you guys all next week on Tavern Talks with our friends over at the Weathered Dragon. They make customized tables and all sorts of cool things like that. Please stick around. Don't leave us just yet. We're going to raid some friends and give them a good shout out when we get there. Just give me 1 second. Let's see.
Who we raiding this evening?
Let's see who we raiding this evening.
Who we raiding?
Uh, let's go. Let's go over to our friends at New Age Geeks and raid them for the evening, shall we? All right, everybody.